She said it on a Tuesday, just a regular Tuesday in October, leaves starting to turn, coffee going cold on the counter, and my daughter, 22 years old, standing in the kitchen with her car keys in her hand, looked at me and said, "Mom, you need your own life." And then she left. And I stood there in that kitchen for probably 4 minutes, just staring at the door she walked out of, because I did not know what to do with that sentence. I did not know if I was supposed to be hurt or proud or ashamed or all three at once. I was 54 years old, and my kid had just told me something I think I had known for years, but had never let myself hear. I am 57 now, and I want to talk to you about what happened after that door closed, because I think some of you are standing in that kitchen right now, or you are about to be. Here is what nobody tells you about empty nest syndrome. Nobody tells you that the grief is real, like medically, neurologically real. Your brain actually goes through something that looks a lot like bereavement when your last child leaves home. The same hormonal crash, the same identity disorientation, the same fog. I read something once from a researcher at Yale who said the grief response in mothers after the last child leaves home is biochemically almost identical to the grief response after losing someone. And I remember thinking, finally, finally, someone said it. Because for 2 years before I heard that, I had been telling myself to just enjoy your freedom, the way everyone kept telling me to. Just enjoy your freedom. Go travel, take up a hobby. And I wanted to scream at those people because freedom felt like a punishment, not a prize. And I needed someone to tell me that my pain was not weakness. It was real, and it had a name. My last child was my daughter, Caitlin. She is the one who said that to me in the kitchen. She was the youngest of three, and by the time she left for her apartment in Austin, 22, first real job, radiantly independent, I had already watched her two brothers grow up and go. But those two felt like rehearsals. Caitlin leaving felt like the final curtain. And I remember the week after she drove away, I walked into her bedroom and I just sat on her bed for probably an hour, not crying, just sitting, like I was waiting for something to happen that was not going to happen. That is the part they do not show you in the movies. It is not always the dramatic sobbing. Sometimes it is just the sitting, the quiet that is so loud it is almost violent. And here is what made it worse, and I did not understand this until much later. It was not just Caitlin I was grieving. It was the whole world that disappeared when she left. Because for 23 years, my social life had been built almost entirely around my children. School pickup lines, soccer practice, band concerts, the other parents I talked to every single week for a decade. I have not spoken to most of them since the kids graduated. We were held together by their schedules, not by actual friendship. And when those schedules ended, that entire world just evaporated overnight. And the loneliness that followed was not just about the kids leaving. It was about an entire social infrastructure collapsing at the same time. And nobody talks about that part. Nobody warns you that you might lose your whole community at the same time you lose your daily purpose. There was a woman named Diane in my neighborhood. We had been what I would call soccer parent friends for about 11 years. Every Saturday morning, sidelines, coffee cups, we knew each other's kids, we complained about the same school administration, we laughed at the same things. And then her youngest and my youngest both graduated the same spring, and I have seen Diane exactly twice in 3 years. We did not have a falling out. We did not stop liking each other. We just ran out of glue. And I think about her sometimes, and I wonder if she feels it too. This particular kind of loneliness that does not have a good word for it. Not grief exactly, more like the feeling of walking into a room and realizing it was never really yours to begin with. Now, here is where it gets more complicated, because some of you are not just dealing with the kids leaving. Some of you are dealing with what comes after the kids leave. The marriage stuff, the moment when the house gets quiet and you and your husband look at each other across the dinner table and realize you have been using the kids as a conversation topic for so long that you do not actually know what to say to each other anymore. I know couples who looked fine on the outside for 20 years and fell apart inside of 18 months once the kids were gone. Not because they hated each other, because they had organized their entire marriage around being parents and never invested in being partners. And when the parenting chapter closed, they had nothing left underneath. I was lucky in that department, or lucky enough. My marriage had its own reckoning, but it survived. But I watched my friend Carol, 53 years old, 26-year marriage, file for divorce 11 months after her youngest left for college. And she told me something I have never forgotten. She said it was not a new problem. It was an old problem they had never had to face because there was always something more pressing. A sick kid, a school crisis, a financial scramble. The kids had been keeping them busy enough to avoid the truth for decades. Empty nest did not break her marriage. It just finally let her see clearly what had always been there. But I want to come back to me, because I owe you that honesty. 6 months after Caitlin drove to Austin, I sat down with a financial advisor for the first time. I was 54 years old. Her name was Renata, mid-40s, very kind, terrible timing. She asked me how much I had set aside for retirement, and I pulled out the folder I had put together the night before, and I slid it across her desk. And I watched her face, and I knew before she said a word that it was not good. And I am not going to give you the exact number, because it still makes me feel a particular kind of shame. But I will tell you that when she looked up at me, I felt something crack open in my chest, because that number on the screen was not just a number. It was proof. It was 30 years of making sure everyone else was taken care of. 30 years of putting the house, the kids, the husband, the school trips, the dental bills first. And the number was proof that somewhere along the way I had erased myself from my own future. And I sat in that office and I cried, not delicately, actually cried. And Renata handed me a tissue and she said, "You are 54 and you have 15 working years in front of you, if you choose to use them. That is not nothing. That is actually a lot." And something about the way she said it made me feel like I was being handed something back. 15 years. I kept turning that over in my mind on the drive home. 15 working years, and I did not even know what I wanted to do with them. That is when I started thinking about what Caitlin had said. Mom, you need your own life. And I started asking myself the most uncomfortable question I had ever asked. Who am I without my kids? Not who was I before them. That person felt too far away to reach. But who am I now at 54 with everything I have lived and learned and carried? What did I never give myself permission to want? I joined a group, not a therapy group, though I was in therapy too, and that helped. This was more informal, a back to work program for women who had stepped out of the workforce or who had been in jobs that never fit. Career relaunch, they called it. 8 women around a table in a community college conference room on Wednesday mornings. And the first session, the facilitator, a woman named Patricia, 61, had gone back to school at 58 to get her master's degree in counseling. She asked everyone to say one thing they had always wanted to do, but had never said out loud. And the room got so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming. And then a woman named Gloria, 56, 2 adult kids, recently separated, said she had wanted to go to law school since she was 23 years old. She had told exactly no one for 33 years. And when she said it in that room, she started laughing and crying at the same time. This particular combination that I think only women of a certain age fully understand. And I thought, there it is. That is the thing. That is the locked room that so many of us have been walking past for decades. I did not go to law school, but I went back. I took 2 courses at the community college that fall. There were scholarships available specifically for women over 50 returning to education, which I did not know was a thing until someone in that group told me. And I took a creative writing course and a nonprofit management course, and I was the oldest person in both classrooms, and I did not care. I did not care at all, because I was so hungry by then, hungry in a way I had not been since I was 25. And here is the thing that surprised me. Not the classes themselves, the identity shift. because somewhere around week 6 of that semester, I stopped thinking of myself primarily as a mother whose kids had left. And I started thinking of myself as a person who was beginning something. And those two things sound similar, but they feel completely different. One is defined by loss. The other is defined by forward motion. And I had been so afraid that choosing forward motion meant betraying my love for my kids, like it was a kind of abandonment in reverse. But that is not what it was. My therapist said something that I wrote down and kept. She said, "The bird that leaves the nest does not betray the nest. She finally becomes what the nest was always preparing her to be." And I am not the nest in that metaphor. Neither are you. Now, I have to tell you something about Boomerang Kids, because this is the part of the story nobody talks about. And I think it needs to be said, because some of you have grieved the leaving. You have done the hard work. You have started to rebuild. And then your kid moves back home at 23 or 24, usually for economic reasons, sometimes after a relationship ends, sometimes just because the world is expensive and hard right now, which it is. And you love your child. You love them completely. But you also feel, and this is the part that carries shame, you feel a grief for the self you were just starting to become. And then you feel guilty for feeling that grief. And so now you are dealing with the guilt on top of the grief, on top of the joy of having them back, on top of the resentment you are not supposed to feel. And nobody talks about this because it sounds like a bad mother problem, but it is not. It is a human problem. My son Marcus, second born, 26 at the time, moved back home for 8 months after a breakup and a job loss that happened within about 6 weeks of each other. And I loved having him there. I genuinely did. But I also remember sitting at my desk one night working on something for the nonprofit course and hearing him in the kitchen making the same sounds he made when he was 16 and thinking, I have to hold both of these things at once. I have to love him being here, and I have to protect the self that was just learning to take up space. And I did, imperfectly. We had some hard conversations, but I did. And when he left the second time, it was different, because I was different. The door closed, and I did not stand there staring at it. I went back to my desk and I kept working. That is what I want to leave you with, not the pain, though the pain is real and valid and deserves to be taken seriously. Not the regret, though I have plenty of it and the years do not come back. What I want to leave you with is this. The reinvention is real. The second act is real. Starting over at 50 or 55 or 58 is not a consolation prize. In some ways, and I say this having lived both halves, in some ways it is the most alive I have ever felt, because I am building something that belongs entirely to me. No one will leave it. No one will grow out of it. It does not have a graduation date. You are allowed to grieve the leaving. You are allowed to sit on the bed. You are allowed to cry in a financial advisor's office about 30 years of putting yourself last. All of that is allowed. And then, and this is the part your daughter, your therapist, your tired heart is asking of you. And then you are allowed to begin. I started at 54. You can start today. If something in this hit you somewhere real, leave a comment and tell me where you are in this, because I read every single one. And sometimes a stranger's honesty is the thing that makes you feel less alone. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to keep having these conversations, subscribe, because I am not done talking, and I do not think you are done listening.